Hi, everybody. If you are here for our ranger-led program of Channel Islands National Park and the Pygmy Mammoth, you're in the right spot. We're going to give a little bit of time for folks to figure out Zoom and make their way into the webinar. We'll get started in 60 seconds. As we wait, I'm going to go ahead and share our first round of different links in the chat. The main one is that last one. If you need captioning services, we've got Caitlin joining us as our ASL interpreter, but you can also access a caption, a recorded caption of this entire program with that link below. Quick shout out to everyone coming from Hoover High School. Super glad to have you guys. All right, 12:03. Let's do it. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Whitesides, and I'm coming at you from California State University Northridge Associated Students Outdoor Adventure Program, where we're super proud to be partnering with National Park Service again, specifically at Channel Islands National Park, where we're lucky enough to have two rangers joining us. Ranger Monique will give a short 30-minute presentation on Channel Islands National Park, and specifically the ancient Pygmy Mammoth. Really cool. We also have Ranger Bethany, who is joining us on the chat, and we'll be using the Q&A function. So with that being said, we'll do some quick Zoom housekeeping. On that big gray ribbon of options you have at the bottom of the screen, you've got the chat box, which you can chat to panelists. Please use that just for like tech support stuff if you need it. Otherwise, we're going to be relying on the question and answer, the Q&A box. You can put questions in there and Ranger Bethany will answer them. Or if you have some that you want Ranger Monique to answer live, we may have time at the end. So save some of those questions that you want to have answered live. And without further ado, I'm going to thank Ranger Monique and Ranger Bethany for joining us, and I will hand it off to you all.
All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here. My name, like Chris said, is Ranger Monique, and I'm here at Channel Islands National Park in Ventura, California. So I have behind me an image of the badge that all Channel Islands National Park Service Rangers wear, and this is really important. I just want to review this. You may have seen some of the other programs, but I just want to reiterate and to share that this is the promise that the National Park Service has made to all of you, to all of us, to our entire nation. So if you look at this, and you may have seen it before, you can notice that there are some images here. We have a sequoia tree, and some of you may be familiar with sequoia trees, and this tree represents the plants, the plants, the flowers, and the other green things that national parks protect. There are sequoia trees in Mariposa Grove in Yosemite National Park, and that is how that park started to be protected, was with that special grove of sequoia trees. And then, as I had just mentioned before, we also have animals that we protect. This is a bison. So national parks protect animals. We also have mountains, deserts, other landscapes, and wild places where you can go for quiet, for solitude, for hiking, for camping. National parks protect those places as well. We also protect lakes, rivers, streams, waters, oceans. Half of the national park where I work is underwater. And the shape of this is very important. This is an arrowhead, and our ancestors and humans had to use tools to survive for thousands of years. So this represents the history, the culture, the stories of our nation that the national parks protect. But today we're going to talk more about animals, right? And one animal in particular. So I just want you to think about, and I know there's some high school students here. Thank you for coming. I was a high school teacher for a long time. I just want you to think right now, how do you think we would know that certain types of animals lived on the islands? How would we know that we had pygmy mammoths? That's a rhetorical question, but we'd find things, right? So this is actually the cast of a pygmy mammoth tusk. And so there are fossils that are found in Channel Islands National Park that are preserved, and they tell us a story about the island. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that story today. And before we do that, I want to show you, well, where is Channel Islands National Park? So Channel Islands National Park is, and you're probably all somewhere within Southern California. I'm in Ventura. There are 8 Channel Islands, and there are 5 in the national park. So some of you might be familiar with Catalina. That is a Channel Island. San Clemente and San Nicolas Island are owned by the Navy. If, as a kid, Hoover High School students, you read Island of the Blue Dolphins, that book took place on this island. It's based on a true story. So these are 3 Channel Islands that are not in the national park, but you can visit Catalina, and some of you might have visited See Me, that summer camp. And these 5 other Channel Islands, these are the Southern Channel Islands, these are the Northern Channel Islands, these 5 other are in the national park. Santa Barbara Island, don't confuse that with a city. I know that can be confusing because that's up here. Anacapa Island, Santa Cruz Island, Santa Rosa Island, and San Miguel Island. So we have found evidence of pygmy mammoths. We have found fossils on San Miguel, Santa Rosa, and Santa Cruz Island. So if you've ever visited the Channel Islands or maybe seen the Channel Islands, maybe this is something you knew, maybe this is something you didn't know, but I just want to encourage you as you go into the summer. We're going to be sharing some links with you from our website where you can learn more about the Channel Islands National Park and pygmy mammoths, but you can visit the islands. They are open in a more limited capacity, 40% capacity, the boats going to these islands right now. And when it's safe, our visitor center in Ventura will reopen in the Ventura Harbor. And I'm going to share more a little bit about what we have here and how it relates to the pygmy mammoth and what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to show you a little clip right now of our park film just to give you an idea of what the islands look like. So we're zooming in right now to North America, and you can see the 8 Channel Islands and the 5 in the national park off the coast of Southern California. The park protects the islands and a mile of ocean around each island. Like I said, half of Channel Islands National Park is underwater. That's a view from Inspiration Point on Anacapa Island, and there's a beautiful kelp forest. So just looking at the islands today can kind of give us an idea of what it may have been like thousands and millions of years ago. So today we're going to investigate. We're going to investigate to see how pygmy mammoth fossils from the Channel Islands can help us answer some questions. How did the mammoths arrive on the islands? And how did they evolve? How did they change once they got there? One thing to note is that there are dwarf mammoths on other islands in the Arctic Ocean in Russia, and the Bering Sea in Alaska, and the Mediterranean. So this isn't the only place where this has happened, but we are a very unique ecosystem here at Channel Islands, and we do call the Channel Islands the Galapagos of North America. And if you don't know what the Galapagos are, that's some summer homework for you, Hoover High School students, to find out more about them as well. So we do know that approximately 40 to 20,000 years ago, that Columbian mammoths, which are the largest mammoths, embarked on a journey to the Channel Islands that would eventually develop into a new species. So let's think about how and when did mammoths get to the northern Channel Islands. I'm going to back my camera up a little bit here. So here's this map again, but I've added some images here to the map on the mainland, and just to give us an idea of what it looked like on the mainland and on the islands during that time period. Like I said, Columbian mammoths were larger than woolly mammoths. They had big, strong legs for walking. And we know that the islands have never been connected to the mainland. They've always been surrounded by water. So that's a question I'm going to plant in your mind right now, everyone who's watching, and especially Hoover High School students. Then how would mammoths get to the Channel Islands? So just think on that. And another thing I just want you to think about is during the Pleistocene ice ages, there's these animals called megafauna. Mega just means huge, fauna means animals. Huge animals like saber-toothed cats and larger horses and huge giant ground sloths, large bison here. So of all these megafauna, we have found fossils on the mainland. We have not found any of those fossils on the islands. So that's another thing. Why might that be? Why would we find mammoth fossils, but not these other animals, what we call Pleistocene megafauna? If you like huge, crazy creatures, Google that after this program, and you'll find some really amazing books and images about that. So I'm going to give you some information about some of the adaptations about mammoths. So I want you to start thinking about that a little bit. How do you think mammoths would get to the islands? We know that mammoths share a common ancestor with elephants. They're not ancestors of elephants, they're more like cousins. So ancient elephants lived at the same time as mammoths. They share traits that are inherited from a common ancestor. And so these traits might have enabled them to swim, right? They have very strong legs, okay? If you've ever seen an elephant, you see that they have strong legs, so they're cousins. They have a trunk that can act as a snorkel. If you've ever been snorkeling, you know that it's something that can help you be in the water a lot longer. And they also have really large lungs. And these large lungs, they can fill with air to make them buoyant, to make them float. One thing, though, you may not have known about elephants and mammoths as well is that they have this amazing adaptation, these inherited physical traits, things they have inherited. These are traits that are physical part of their body. Look at this. This is looks really different than maybe you thought their skull might have looked like. So this is basically a cross section. So we kind of, in this image, the front part has been cut off, but they have air cells in their skulls that reduce their bone density. And so the skull shown here has that top layer of bone taken off to show this kind of honeycomb of thin bone. And there's air cells in there. It's like these air pockets. So these air pockets help reduce weight in the bones. If this skull were solid, they have huge heads. Mammoths did, and elephants do too. They would not be able to lift their heads. They would be too heavy. So these can help elephants, and maybe could have helped mammoths float. So we can't know for sure that mammoths could swim, but let's look more closely at one of their close relatives. And we're going to hear from two experts right now. I'm going to show you a little video clip, a geologist and a paleontologist who have worked on pygmy mammoth excavations and discoveries in Channel Islands National Park. And let's see what they say.
Elephants are fantastic swimmers. So they didn't necessarily need a land bridge. When sea level was low, the distance between the mainland and the islands was minimized, and mammoths could migrate over by swimming. And proboscideans, like elephants and mammoths, are known to be very good swimmers. They're even distantly related to manatees, which are excellent swimmers.
So that is essentially the conclusion or the theory that scientists have about how mammoths got to the islands. But there's actually some other information that's really important to understand. So what we know about their cousins, elephants, but also there was something else going on. There were other factors or other things that influenced the mammoth's ability to arrive on the Channel Islands. So here is an image of the islands from the beach, really close to the visitor center here at Channel Islands National Park. And you can see Anacapa Island over here. It's 3 islets. You can see Santa Cruz Island here. It's about 24 miles across here to Santa Cruz. We know that elephants today can swim about 20 miles in calm water, right? But this distance is a little bit further than that. And sometimes, if you've ever been on a boat in the Santa Barbara Channel, you know that there are strong currents and rough seas. But if you were listening to what our geologist was saying, he talked about how the geography was different during the ice ages. So sea level was different. So I want to show you a little video to help us visualize or imagine these changes that occurred during the Pleistocene ice ages, the last ice ages that we had. So if you look here, you can watch and see as global ice is increasing, it is sucking up the water, and you see what's happening to the water in the ocean around our islands. The sea level is dropping. Water that was in the ocean is now tied up in ice. And so the Northern Channel Islands become one big island during glacial periods. As the ice melts, sea level rises, and you can see now it's 4 separate islands. And this happened more than once. When the ice advances again, the sea level drops again, and you see this distance, especially right here. It was about 5-6 miles, maybe as close as 4 at some. As the last glacial period ended, the water level rose to the level it is today. And we do know that the Pleistocene era is typically defined as the time period that began about 2.6 million years ago and lasted until about 11,700 years ago. So remember this of what it looks like today. And during those periods in the ice ages when the water level was lower, this is how close it would have been from the mainland to the islands. And Columbian mammoths were very likely drawn to the islands by the smell of vegetation. So abundant vegetation on the islands. And that vegetation looked a little different as well. And so that's one of the theories that scientists have as well too. They were able to smell food. Essentially, they are vegetarians and they have to eat a lot and constantly. And so that's one of the theories of why they swam over. And I'm going to show you now just kind of a more graphic here, just to help you visualize that a little bit better of this outline. And you can see the glacial shoreline, the present shoreline on all these 4 Northern Channel Islands, and that glacial shoreline of Santa Rosa Island. And so climate and sea level and the amount of exposed land all played a role in allowing mammoths to swim to this large ancient island of Santa Rosa. And we believe that it was about 20,000 years ago. And that was when between 20 and 40,000 years ago, when the first Columbian mammoths went over to Santa Rosa. And the habitat looked really different during that time period. So during the glacial periods, weather was cooler and there was more rain. So this is the chaparral. This is basically the habitat that we see now on most areas of the Northern Channel Islands. But during those glacial periods, there were more pine trees, cypress trees, ironwoods. Interglacial periods were warmer with less rain, and the islands then started to develop more shrubs, grasses, and oaks like we see today. So how do we know that? How do we know that there were more trees? Well, we have fossils also of plants as well. And also there are scientists who are studying pollen analysis of the island at the end of the Pleistocene. So they are looking in the rocks, and they are trying to figure out, so what plants were there? But you've probably seen also like images of prints of especially the ironwood, which you can still see on the islands and in our native plant garden. That plant used to be all over, not all over, but it used to be in California, and the only place it survives now is on the Channel Islands. So that's pretty amazing. So we've talked about how we think the mammoths got to the islands and how this environment was a little bit different. I also want to talk about how do we think that they changed and why did they change? So how small did the pygmy mammoth become? So this is just to think about is that Columbian mammoths could weigh up to 20,000 pounds. That is the weight of 4 large pickup trucks like Ford F-150s. That's pretty heavy, and over 13 feet tall. That's taller than a school bus. Most school buses are about 10 feet tall. That's really large. Pygmy mammoths weighed around 2,000 pounds and were 4.5 to 7 feet tall. So I'm 5'5", so pygmy mammoth, you know, could have been about here or a bit taller than me. And that still seems large, but compared to the Columbian mammoth, that is much, much smaller. And so we see these examples of dwarfism. The root word is dwarf on islands. If you are really interested in this, students and the entire audience, if you Google island dwarfism, you'll find these amazing examples of animals from around the world. And that's why islands are such fascinating places to study evolution, because it happens very quickly, much more quickly than it would on the mainland, because animals have to adapt really quickly. So I'm going to show you some things to help demonstrate this a little better. So right here, I have a human femur. Our femur is the bone right in our thigh. And it goes from your hip to your knee, and everyone's slightly different in size, but this is the largest bone in the human body. So what I want you to do is actually take your 3 fingers on your right hand and then wrap your left hand and forefinger snugly around them at the first joint down here and slide that off. And that's about the width of your femur. So this is about how big around your femur is. It's long, it is strong, but it might be a little thinner than you thought it might have been, right? So it's a tube-like bone that supports your weight. So hopefully that gives you a better appreciation for your femur when you're walking or jogging or exercising. So what do we think the femur of a pygmy mammoth looks like? So here we can see that's a pygmy mammoth femur. It's quite larger than a human femur, right? A lot larger. So remember, pygmy mammoths are about, well, yes, it's about 60% smaller, but this is an extreme case of island dwarfism. And how can we kind of get an idea of that island dwarfism a little bit better? Let's see what a Columbian mammoth femur looks like. I'm going to set that one right there. It's kind of hard to hold these both at the same time. This, I don't even know if it'll fit in the whole frame. This is a Columbian mammoth femur. It's huge. It is almost as tall as I am. So I'm standing it up right here. Well, it's like right there up to like mid-arm. So I'm going to try to do this. They're not as heavy as they look. They're casts. They're not real, but they are casts of actual fossils. Look at this one. It's just always amazes me whenever I look at these and I see this pygmy mammoth femur up here compared to the Columbian mammoth femur. And it's just such a huge difference. So this is one of the reasons that fossils are really vital scientific evidence that help us understand how and why this island dwarfism might have happened. So I want you to think about what might some of the advantages and disadvantages of being smaller on an island be? What do you think? Any ideas? Especially you students. I'm sure your teacher would be really happy if you chatted something. what might some advantages or disadvantages of being smaller on an island be? How could it help you? Or how could it harm you or be hard? Any ideas? Well, I want you to think about what all creatures, including us, need to survive. We need a habitat, we need food, we need space, we need water, right? So someone just chatted, it's easier to hide. Very good. Easier to get through some places. You're smaller, you can get around the island faster, right? You can hide and go into certain spaces. So those are all really good points. And also, if you're smaller, you're not going to need as much food or water, right? And so you can answer the first question on your guide. I think that's your teacher who's saying that right now. Okay, so let's talk about some of those advantages. And I want you to think about that, students and all participants in our audience here. So advantages, you would need less food and water. You could withstand higher temperatures. You are more agile. It's easier to move around. You reach maturity. You can reproduce faster, and resources can support more individuals. Disadvantages, it's harder to reach higher. You saw the pictures of what those trees probably look like on the islands. It's harder to reach food that's higher up. You're more vulnerable, especially your offspring, your babies. You live your shorter lifespan, and it'd be harder to swim to the mainland. Once you got to the islands, and maybe you were stuck there, or it was harder to get back. So I know we're close to wrapping it up here. And then also, yeah, predators on islands. Were there any predators? Well, I've already talked about how saber-toothed cats and some of those other animals were not on the islands. So I really just want to quickly talk about some of the discoveries that we have made of fossils on the islands. On Santa Rosa Island, we have found some really amazing pygmy mammoth fossils, and it's really important to know that it's uncommon to find pygmy mammoth remains. And our retired park archaeologist shared, for every 100 animals that die, one of those animals dies and is fossilized, and one of those is actually found. So it's really actually rare to find fossils. We did find in 1994, paleontologists made this discovery, and it is a nearly intact pygmy mammoth. And you can see this. This is the cast in our visitor center here in the Ventura Harbor, and you can see this. But are there more fossils on the islands? Have we discovered more recently? This is an image of a tusk, and remember, the tusk that's barely sticking out of the ground. And there's the radio right up next to it to show the size. And Peter Larramendi and another scientist were on Santa Rosa Island doing water surveys. And when they saw this, they knew that they had needed to take photos and record their GPS coordinates and tell National Park Service experts to come and collect this fossil for information. He didn't disturb it. That's really important. If you think you found a fossil, you don't want to disturb it. You want to tell somebody of what you found. And they started to dig and excavate. And you can see here the skull, right? Remember we talked about the aerosols, air pockets, and some of the tools that they're using to really carefully excavate this fossil. It wasn't just a tusk. There was a lot more here. Do we know, if looking at this photo, if this is a Columbian mammoth or a pygmy mammoth? No, we don't know yet. And so how else would, what will we be looking for? We call that morphology, or the size of this. What would we be looking for to help us figure out what species this is? So this is Monica, and she worked at the mammoth site, and she's a fossil preparator, and she's using all these tools, and you can see now it's starting to take shape, right? You can see that it's protected here in a cast, and she's very carefully getting away the rock, the dirt, the sand, everything that's been layered here for 13,000 years. That's the estimated age of this fossil here. So is this more like a Columbian mammoth or a pygmy mammoth? Well, I'm going to show you a picture of the Larramendi skull now. This is a recent image from the Mammoth site in South Dakota. And I want you to notice the tusks, right? And how different these tusks look. This one's really large and curved. This one is a bit smaller. So we have actually recently received information that this animal represents an evolutionary transition between a pygmy mammoth and a Columbian mammoth. So this shows us the evolutionary process of island dwarfism. This is a remarkable finding. So we're going to be doing further scientific analysis using DNA to tell us more of the story. Because right now we know this just from the morphology, the size. It doesn't fit into either of the two species. So this is probably going to give us more questions than answers, this transitional species. And one last question I want to leave you with, too, to think about. If we look at this timeline, we know that that Larramendi mammoth skull is about 13,000 years old, and that the last known pygmy mammoths on the islands are as young as 11,800 years old. We also know that the oldest human remains found on Santa Rosa Island were 12,900 years ago. So what question does that bring to mind? Were people and pygmy mammoths on the islands at the same time? Did the Larramendi mammoth, the one that we just found, encounter people? Did people hunt pygmy mammoths? What role did people play in pygmy mammoth extinction? Did they play a role? Did they hunt them? So those are the questions that we don't know the answers to. And that's why we have national parks, to protect these fossils so we can figure out these stories and this history. National parks are really unique places filled with rare plants and animals that you find nowhere else on Earth. And so Channel Islands National Park is especially unique because it's islands that have been surrounded by the ocean, as we saw. And so these fossils can help us understand how the Earth and its life forms evolved together. Then this national park, Channel Islands National Park, and all national parks belong to you. They belong to all of us, and it's a place for us to visit and enjoy, but also to protect, so it can continue to be a special place far into the future. That's really all I have. I know I went a few minutes over, so I'm going to kick it back to Chris and see if you have any time for maybe 1 minute of questions.
1 minute of questions. We've got some super good ones real quick.
I forgot to
show
you
think,
this.
Nice. The Columbian?
Well, this is, yeah, we couldn't find a pygmy mammoth, but sorry, go ahead with the questions.
Do you think mammoths could survive on the island today?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, just based on the amount of plants that they need to survive, I don't think that they could. I can't tell you exactly how many pounds of food like current day elephants need to survive, but I know it's a lot. They are eating constantly. So there wouldn't be enough vegetation for them.
Got it. And that's also helpful because you did tell us that the island has changed a bunch.
Yeah.
Wink, wink, especially the flora out on the native plants.
Exactly.
They call that place home. Another question, and this one is a little technical, but do you know how fossils actually form? It's weird.
That's a great question. I mean, I can give that a stab. I'm not a paleontologist. I'm friends with a paleontologist at Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. But if you just think about, okay, let me get, if you just think about something getting buried, right? Mm-hmm. And having layers and layers of dirt and sand and rock on it over years, then it becomes fossilized. For example, what that process exactly is, I couldn't exactly explain it like chemically or the way it works. I've seen fossilized tree trunks, or we have fossilized caliche forests on San Miguel Island. And so it's essentially, I saw one at the Smithsonian once, like a tree trunk that had essentially turned into a fossil. It had become rock. But that's a great question. Like how it became rock, I'm not exactly sure. So I'm going to have to do more research about that too. And I hope you do too.
Got it. And Ranger Bethany did share a resource for us in a sublink
Thanks,
to a
Ranger
different
Bethany.
part of nps.gov, which talks specifically about mammoths and can answer some of the other questions. But I think that's it for now. I want to be respectful of your time, Monique and Ranger Bethany. But thank you for joining us and doing this presentation. This presentation was being recorded, so if folks want to go back and see if they missed anything or answer some of those other questions that Ranger Monique probably got to, we'll have that uploaded on our website, and I'll go ahead and dump those links one more time in the chat. It'll be that second link that the recording's at. Otherwise, thank you all for taking some time out of your day to join us. Thank you again to Ranger Monique and Ranger Bethany for all the work that you do out on the island, not just this little presentation. And next time we're in the area, we'll make sure to look you up when the park's open.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you all. We've got more programs coming up. Tomorrow we're going to go to Sequoia National Park, but you're stuck with just me as we go through a Google Earth tour of Sequoia. And then on Thursday, we're going to go to Big Thicket Preserve in Texas. Both of those are going to go down at 12 o'clock noon. So we hope to see you then. Thanks all for coming.